11. Black celebrities who lost everything after transitioning. What if simply living as your true self could cost you your career, your reputation, and even your place in society for generations? Black LGBTQ+ pioneers faced a world where racism and prejudice could turn extraordinary talent into a target. Some were pushed out of the spotlight, others worked from the shadows, and many waited decades for the recognition they deserved. Yet they refused to let history erase them. From Little Richard and Bayard Rustin to Tracy Norman and Marsha P. These are stories of courage, sacrifice, and survival. Before we begin, subscribe to Golden Black Legends and comment below which Black LGBTQ+ pioneer do you believe history overlooked the most. Little Richard. Little Richard didn't simply perform rock and roll. He helped define its explosive sound and visual language while living through an era that offered little room for a black artist whose sexuality and presentation challenged convention. Born Richard Wayne Penniman in Macon, Georgia, he transformed himself into a force of nature, towering hair, makeup, flamboyant clothes, pounding piano, and a voice that sounded unlike anything mainstream America was prepared to hear. His breakthrough came with Tutti Frutti in 1955, followed by classics including Long Tall Sally, Rip It Up, Lucille, and Good Golly, Miss Molly. Yet the racial economics of 1950s music were brutal. White performers recorded versions of songs popularized by black musicians, often gaining access to audiences that segregation kept beyond the original artist's reach. Richard spent decades demanding greater recognition for black pioneers and proudly asserting his foundational place in rock history. But another conflict unfolded privately. Richard made different statements about his sexuality throughout his lifetime. At various moments, he discussed attraction to men and described himself in ways that challenged heterosexual norms. During periods of intense Christian devotion, however, he rejected homosexual relationships. Rather than forcing one modern label onto him, his own changing words reveal a painful struggle between desire, faith, identity, and the religious world that shaped him. The transcript captures this internal conflict, although its claim that his father expelled him specifically for being gay should be treated cautiously rather than stated as unquestioned fact. Recognition eventually arrived. Richard entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's inaugural class in 1986 and received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 1993. Little Richard died from bone cancer on May 9, 2020 at 87. He helped liberate generations through music while spending much of his own extraordinary life negotiating whether society, religion, and even he himself could fully accept the man behind the spectacle. Tracy Africa Norman. Tracy Africa. Norman seemed destined for a glamorous career, but her rise through 1970s fashion collided with an industry that was far less accepting than the photograph suggested. A black transgender woman from Newark, New Jersey, Norman entered modeling without publicly disclosing that she was transgender. Her beauty and striking presence soon opened doors that few black models, especially transgender women, could access at the time. Her breakthrough came during the mid-1970s. Norman worked with renowned photographer Irving Penn and appeared in Italian Vogue. Even greater visibility followed when she became associated with Clairol's Born Beautiful hair color line. Her image appeared on boxes for years, making her face recognizable to countless consumers who knew nothing about the private history she was protecting. The transcript correctly identifies the Clairol campaign as a defining achievement of her early career. Then everything changed. During an Essence magazine assignment around 1980, Norman was outed as transgender. According to Norman's later accounts, opportunities rapidly disappeared afterward. An industry that had celebrated her appearance suddenly stopped calling. Her mainstream American modeling career effectively collapsed, illustrating how quickly prejudice could erase professional momentum. Norman did not disappear completely. She worked overseas and became connected with New York's ballroom community, where she found greater acceptance. Decades later, her pioneering story finally reached a much larger audience. A major 2015 profile renewed public interest, and Clairol subsequently brought her back for a campaign, an extraordinary return, more than 3 decades after rejection had interrupted her career. Now in her 70s, Tracy Norman represents something larger than a comeback. She survived an era that demanded secrecy simply to work, then lived long enough to see the fashion world begin recognizing what it had lost, a pioneering black transgender model who deserved her place in history all along. Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin helped engineer one of the defining demonstrations in American history, yet for decades his name remained far less familiar than those of the leaders who stood before the cameras. He was black, openly gay, within much of his personal and activist world, politically controversial, and extraordinarily gifted at organizing movements. Those qualities made him indispensable, but his sexuality also gave opponents a weapon they repeatedly tried to use against him. Born in Pennsylvania in 1912, Rustin became committed to nonviolent resistance long before it became synonymous with the civil rights movement. He studied Gandhian strategies, participated in campaigns against segregation, and later advised Martin Luther King Jr. on nonviolent protest. But in 1953, Rustin was arrested in Pasadena, California, after being discovered having sex with another man. He pleaded guilty to a morals charge and served jail time. In an era when homosexuality was criminalized and viciously stigmatized, that conviction followed him everywhere. Some civil rights allies worried his sexuality could damage their cause. Rustin was pushed away from visible leadership at critical moments, even though movements continued relying on his strategic abilities. His greatest organizational triumph arrived in 1963. Rustin was the principal organizer of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, coordinating the enormous operation that brought roughly 250,000 people to Washington, D.C., where King delivered his historic "I Have a Dream" speech. Opponents attempted to exploit Rustin's sexuality before the march, but the event became a landmark success. Rustin refused to allow that history to define him only through humiliation. Later in life, he increasingly advocated for gay rights, connecting another struggle for equality with principles he had defended for decades. He died in 1987 at 75. In 2013, President Barack Obama posthumously awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Rustin did not literally lose everything. The more accurate tragedy is subtler. America benefited enormously from his brilliance, while prejudice repeatedly pressured one of its greatest civil rights strategists to work from the shadows. Jackie Shane. Jackie Shane walked onto a stage in glamorous clothing, makeup, and jewelry, and delivered soul music with such authority that audiences could not ignore her. A black transgender performer emerging when both racism and hostility toward gender nonconformity were deeply entrenched, Shane built a remarkable career without surrendering the individuality that made her unforgettable. Born in Nashville in 1940, Shane grew up in the segregated South before eventually establishing herself in Toronto's thriving music scene. There she found an audience for a performance style that combined Southern rhythm and blues with extraordinary confidence. Her signature recording "Became Any Other Way," released in the early 1960s. The song became a Canadian hit, and Shane's playful emphasis on the lyric about telling someone she was gay later took on additional meaning for listeners, although its original songwriting context should not be rewritten as a literal coming-out declaration. On stage, Shane refused to conform. She performed in makeup-styled hair and feminine clothing years before mainstream entertainment offered meaningful visibility to transgender artists. Yet the transcript goes too far when it claims record labels simply closed their doors and prejudice directly forced her to disappear. Shane's withdrawal from performing in the early 1970s involved personal choices and circumstances that cannot responsibly be reduced to one cause. Then came an extraordinary rediscovery. After decades outside public life, renewed interest in Shane's recordings introduced her to listeners who finally had language for the barriers she had navigated. The archival collection, Any Other Way, received a Grammy nomination for Best Historical Album, bringing long-delayed recognition. The transcript correctly captures this remarkable late-career rediscovery. Jackie Shane died in Nashville in 2019 at 78. Her story is powerful precisely without exaggeration. She did not need modern celebrity culture to validate her identity. Decades earlier, when visibility carried genuine risks, Jackie Shane had already stepped onto the stage and insisted on being seen on her own terms. Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson never accumulated wealth, political power, or the protections usually associated with an American icon. Yet from the streets of New York City, she became one of the most enduring figures in LGBTQ+ history. Born Malcolm Michaels Jr. in Elizabeth, New Jersey in 1945, Johnson moved to New York after high school with very little money and built a life within Greenwich Village's marginalized queer community. Johnson became associated with the Stonewall Uprising of June 1969, but accuracy matters. She is frequently described as the person who threw the first brick. That claim is not established fact, and Johnson herself recalled arriving after the uprising had already begun. The transcript repeats the first brick legend, so that detail should not be used as certainty. What is undeniable is her subsequent activism. Alongside Sylvia Rivera, Johnson co-founded Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR, which supported homeless and vulnerable transgender and gender non-conforming young people. Johnson understood their circumstances personally. Despite her growing importance within the movement, she experienced poverty, housing instability, encounters with police, and periods of serious mental distress. Even her identity requires historical sensitivity. Johnson referred to herself using terms available in her era, including gay transvestite and drag queen. Today, she is widely honored as a transgender pioneer, but imposing contemporary terminology without acknowledging her own language can oversimplify her history. Johnson was only 46 when her body was discovered in the Hudson River in July 1992. Authorities initially classified her death as suicide, a conclusion disputed by friends and activists. The case was later reopened, but no definitive explanation has emerged. Marsha's greatest legacy therefore lies not in a mythical brick. It lies in something better documented. While struggling to survive herself, she repeatedly fought for people who had even less protection than she did. Billy Strayhorn. Billy Strayhorn created music recognized around the world while spending much of his career standing several steps behind the man whose orchestra performed it. A brilliant black composer, arranger, pianist, and openly gay man, Strayhorn became Duke Ellington's closest musical collaborator and helped shape the sound of one of jazz history's greatest ensembles. Born in 1915, Strayhorn spent much of his youth in Pittsburgh. His sophistication appeared astonishingly early. While still young, he began composing Lush Life, a harmonically intricate song that would become a jazz standard. In 1938, he met Ellington, demonstrating his musical abilities so convincingly that their professional partnership soon began. Strayhorn's contributions were enormous. He wrote Take the A Train, which became the Duke Ellington Orchestra's signature theme, and contributed compositions and arrangements across decades of collaboration. Ellington famously described Strayhorn as his right arm, my left arm, language reflecting how indispensable he had become. His sexuality is equally important to his historical significance. Strayhorn lived comparatively openly as a gay man within his circles during an era when homosexuality was criminalized and intensely stigmatized. However, the transcript goes beyond the evidence when it argues that his sexuality directly caused his professional marginalization or that Ellington effectively exploited him because he was gay. Questions of credit, copyright, collaboration, race, and public visibility were more complicated than that. Strayhorn developed esophageal cancer and died on May 31, 1967 at only 51. Shortly afterward, Ellington recorded the tribute album, and his mother called him Bill. For years, casual listeners knew Ellington's name far better than Strayhorn's. But history has increasingly restored the distinction he deserves. Billy Strayhorn was not merely somebody working in another genius's shadow. He was one of the geniuses creating the music. Miss Major Griffin-Gracy. Miss Major Griffin-Gracy survived circumstances designed to push Black transgender women to society's margins, then spent decades making survival easier for those who came after her. Her story is not simply one of personal identity, it is about incarceration, homelessness, discrimination, chosen family, and an extraordinary lifetime of advocacy. Born in Chicago in 1940, Miss Major came of age when transgender people had few legal protections and Black transgender women faced overlapping racism, poverty, and anti-LGBTQ+ discrimination. She eventually became part of queer communities in New York and was present during the era of the 1969 Stonewall Uprising. Her path was anything but easy. Miss Major experienced homelessness and incarceration, including imprisonment in men's facilities. She later spoke about violence and degrading treatment within the prison system. The transcript is correct to emphasize those hardships, but it oversimplifies events when it suggests she was imprisoned specifically because her transgender identity collided with the legal system after Stonewall. Her incarceration history was more complicated and should not be rewritten into a cleaner dramatic narrative. What Miss Major did afterward became her defining achievement. She devoted herself to supporting transgender and gender non-conforming people, particularly Black trans women affected by poverty, incarceration, homelessness, and HIV/AIDS. She became especially influential through her work with the Transgender Gender Variant and Intersex Justice Project, commonly known as TGIJP. Younger activists came to regard her affectionately as Mama, reflecting a leadership style built around community rather than celebrity. Miss Major Griffin-Gracy died in October 2025 at 78 after more than half a century connected to struggles for transgender dignity and survival. She paid a profound price for living in a society that offered people like her little protection. Yet, prejudice never received the final word. Miss Major transformed experiences that could have silenced her into decades of advocacy, leaving future generations with something she rarely possessed in her youth, a visible example that survival itself could become resistance. Alvin Ailey. Alvin Ailey built an institution that transformed American dance, yet one of the most personal dimensions of his life existed far from the celebratory spotlight. As a Black gay man born in the segregated South, Ailey reached extraordinary artistic heights while living in a period when openness about sexuality could carry serious professional and social consequences. Born in 1931 in Rogers, Texas, Ailey experienced poverty, racism, and family instability during childhood. After moving to Los Angeles, he discovered concert dance and studied with choreographer Lester Horton. When Horton died in 1953, the young Ailey assumed leadership responsibilities within the company, an early indication of his remarkable ambition. In 1958, he founded the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater in New York. 2 years later came his masterpiece, Revelations, drawing upon Black spirituals, blues church traditions, and memories of Southern life. It became his signature work and eventually one of the most widely performed pieces of modern dance. Ailey's sexuality was known within parts of his world, but he guarded his intimate life carefully. It would be inaccurate to claim that being gay destroyed his career. His achievements clearly demonstrate otherwise. The heavier price was living at the intersection of racism and homophobia while carrying enormous responsibility as the public face of a groundbreaking Black arts institution. His later years included serious physical and emotional difficulties. Ailey died on December 1, 1989, at 58 from complications related to AIDS. At his request, the publicly announced cause initially referred to a terminal blood disorder, reflecting the intense stigma surrounding AIDS at the time. That detail captures the painful contradiction of his era. Alvin Ailey gave Black identity unprecedented visibility on major stages around the world. Yet even at the end of his own life, complete openness carried consequences. He chose not to face publicly. His company survived him, and today his choreography continues moving audiences across generations. Sir Lady Java. Sir Lady Java turned glamour into resistance at a time when simply stepping onto a stage could bring police intervention. Born in New Orleans, Java became a celebrated Black performer in Los Angeles during the 1960s, captivating nightclub audiences with elaborate gowns, sophisticated choreography, and an image that challenged rigid expectations surrounding gender. But unlike many entertainers whose battles remained private, Java confronted discrimination directly. Her greatest conflict came from Los Angeles Rule No. 9, an ordinance used to restrict performers from impersonating or presenting as another sex without specific conditions. As Java's popularity grew, authorities began interfering with her performances, threatening clubs that allowed her to appear. For an entertainer earning a living through nightclub work, the consequences were devastating. The government was effectively restricting her ability to practice her profession. Java refused to quietly disappear. With support from the ACLU, she challenged the discriminatory rule in the late 1960s. The legal effort did not immediately eliminate the ordinance, but her resistance became an important early episode in American transgender civil rights history. The transcript correctly emphasizes this confrontation, although descriptions of repeated handcuffing and total career destruction should not be presented without specific documentation. Her story is particularly remarkable because this happened years before the 1969 Stonewall Uprising transformed LGBTQ+ activism nationally. Java was already challenging institutional discrimination when transgender performers possessed almost no mainstream political protection. She later received renewed recognition as younger generations discovered the significance of her stand. Sir Lady Java died in 2024 at 82. Her legacy extends beyond entertainment. At a moment when remaining silent might have protected her from additional scrutiny, she chose confrontation instead. The glamorous gowns authorities attempted to police ultimately became symbols of something far greater, a Black artist insisting that neither government nor prejudice had the right to decide who could stand beneath the spotlight. Octavia St. Laurent. Octavia St. Laurent dreamed of becoming an internationally recognized model, and when audiences encountered her in the landmark documentary Paris is Burning, that ambition was impossible to miss. Elegant, outspoken, and fiercely determined, Octavia became one of the memorable figures representing New York's Black and Latino ballroom culture. Yet the mainstream fashion world she dreamed of entering offered far fewer opportunities to transgender women than the ballroom community did. Born in Brooklyn in 1964, Octavia found recognition through New York's ballroom scene during the 1980s. Balls provided marginalized LGBTQ+ people with spaces to compete, create identities, form chosen families, and celebrate forms of beauty that mainstream institutions frequently rejected. Then came Paris is Burning, Jenny Livingston's influential documentary filmed during the late 1980s and released commercially in 1991. Octavia spoke openly on camera about wanting fame, wealth, beauty, and a modeling career comparable to the supermodels she admired. Reality proved much harsher. Opportunities for Black transgender models were extremely limited, and Octavia never achieved the level of mainstream fashion success she imagined. However, the transcript overstates the evidence when it claims agencies rejected her specifically upon discovering her transgender identity or that she lost million-dollar contracts. Those details should not be repeated as established fact. Octavia later appeared in other projects and remained connected to ballroom and LGBTQ+ culture. She also spoke publicly about living with HIV and used her visibility to discuss safer sex and AIDS awareness. Her health eventually deteriorated. Octavia St. Laurent died in 2009 at 45 after battling cancer. She never became the international supermodel she once envisioned. Yet history delivered another form of recognition. Decades after Paris is burning, Octavia's uncompromising presence continues introducing new generations to the dreams and painful limitations experienced by Black transgender women who sought visibility long before mainstream culture was prepared to embrace them. Tenica Watson. Tenica Watson never expected one car ride to define how millions of strangers would see her. Yet on the night of March 18, 1982, she was riding with R&B superstar Teddy Pendergrass when his Rolls-Royce crashed in Philadelphia. Pendergrass suffered a devastating spinal cord injury that left him paralyzed from the chest down. Watson survived, but what happened afterward exposed her to a different kind of trauma. Watson was a transgender woman, and once the press discovered her identity, sensational coverage quickly became part of the story. Instead of focusing solely on the catastrophic accident and its victims, reports emphasized who Watson was and why she had been inside Pendergrass' vehicle. Rumors multiplied. Watson was blamed, in some public narratives, for distracting Pendergrass or somehow causing the crash. She later rejected those claims and maintained that she was simply a passenger. The transcript correctly identifies the outing and humiliating attention she experienced after the accident, but its claims that she was a prominent runway model whose flourishing career was immediately destroyed require stronger documentation before being stated as fact. The verified tragedy was already serious enough. In 1982, transgender people, particularly Black transgender women, had little protection from sensational media treatment. Watson suddenly found intensely personal information exposed before a public searching for explanations after one of R&B's biggest stars suffered a life-changing injury. She largely disappeared from mainstream attention afterward. Decades later, Watson spoke publicly about the crash and challenged myths that had followed her for years, giving audiences an opportunity to hear the story from the woman who had actually been there. Even Watson's age should be handled carefully. A sufficiently reliable public birth date has not been established, so inventing one would contradict a factual approach. Tenica Watson's story is therefore not about proving every dramatic claim surrounding that night. It is about what can be documented. She survived a horrific accident and then had to survive the public exposure, stigma, and speculation that followed. These 11 Black LGBTQ+ icons did more than challenge expectations. They endured rejection, discrimination, lost opportunities, and painful battles simply for refusing to disappear. From Little Richard's lifelong conflict between faith and identity to Tracy Norman's shattered modeling career, Bayard Rustin's forced position behind the scenes, and Jackie Shane's decades away from the spotlight, their journeys reveal how costly authenticity could become. Yet their influence survived every attempt to silence them. Today, their courage continues to inspire generations who enjoy freedoms these pioneers could only imagine. But here's the question: which of these legends paid the greatest price for living their truth, and did history give them the recognition they deserved? Share your opinion below, subscribe to Golden Black Legends, and join the conversation.